The HOA fined me $50,000 for building a dam. A dam that was the only thing keeping their own neighborhood from turning into a swamp. They didn't just send angry letters, they sent a deputy to my front door, threatening to throw me in jail if I didn't tear it down immediately. The HOA president, a real Karen named Marlene, stood behind him, smirking, waving around a stack of obviously forged documents. She thought she had me cornered, that I would just roll over and pay, but she had no idea. I was secretly collecting evidence that would expose every single one of her crimes. So when they forced me to destroy my own work, I did exactly what they asked. And then I sat back and watched it all go under. What would you do when the same people who tried to ruin you come begging you to save them from their own mess? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because you are not ready for this story. It all started with a simple white envelope. It didn't look like much. Just another piece of mail from the Homeowners Association. Probably a newsletter about landscaping rules or a reminder about trash can placement. I set it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee, planning to open it later. I'd lived in this house for over 30 years, raised my kids here, and planned on spending the rest of my days enjoying the peace and quiet. I'm a retired electrician, a man who believes in fixing things that are broken and leaving alone the things that work. For the most part, the HOA was just a low-level annoyance, a necessary part of suburban life. But that afternoon, when I finally slid open that envelope, my peaceful retirement came to a screeching halt. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the HOA letterhead at the top, but it was the numbers printed in big, bold red ink that made my blood run cold. Fine assessment, $50,000. I read it again. Then a third time. My mind just couldn't process it. It had to be a typo. Maybe they meant 500. Even that would have been outrageous. I scanned the page for an explanation, my hands starting to shake slightly. The violation listed was unauthorized construction and alteration of community water flow. It was for the dam, for years. The 3 houses at the bottom of our cul-de-sac, mine included, had a serious problem. Every time we got a heavy spring rain, the creek behind our properties would overflow. It wasn't just a little bit of water. It was a muddy torrent that turned our backyards into a swamp. It ruined flower beds, seeped into sheds, and came dangerously close to our foundations. My next-door neighbor, George, lost a brand-new lawnmower to the flooding last year. We complained to the HOA for years. They sent out a committee, looked at the problem, and then sent us a letter saying any large-scale solution was cost-prohibitive. In other words, it was our problem, not theirs, so I decided to fix it myself. I spent a month planning and another 2 months building a small, sturdy, weird dam on the edge of my property line where the creek bottlenecked. It wasn't anything huge, just a reinforced concrete and rock structure designed to slow the water during a downpour and redirect the excess into a natural runoff channel. I'm not a civil engineer, but as an electrician, I know how to read plans and build things to last. It worked perfectly. The very next month, we had a storm that would have normally put our yards under a foot of water. But the dam held. The water level rose, slowed, and drained away exactly as it was supposed to. My neighbors, George and Clara, were thrilled. They brought me a bottle of whiskey to thank me. They said I had saved them thousands in potential damages. Now, staring at this fine, I was completely baffled. $50,000 for building something that saved their yards. It made no sense. The letter was signed by Marlene Graves, the HOA president. She was a woman who seemed to enjoy the little bit of power she had far too much. But I never imagined she was capable of something like this. The letter was aggressive, filled with threatening language about liens on my property and daily compounding interest if the fine wasn't paid within 30 days. Stapled to the back were what looked like photocopies of county permits. They were blurry, the signatures were smudged, and they cited regulations that I was sure didn't even exist. It all looked fake, like something put together in a hurry. My first instinct was that this was a terrible mistake, that could be cleared up with a simple phone call. I was a reasonable man, and I assumed they were reasonable people, so I picked up the phone and called the HOA's main office number, which was really just Marlene's home phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and impatient. I explained who I was and that I was calling about the fine notice. "There's no mistake, Mr. Miller," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "You built an unauthorized structure in direct violation of community water regulations. The fine stands." I tried to explain that the regulations she cited didn't seem legitimate, and that the dam was solving a problem the HOA refused to address. I told her the neighbors were happy with it. "We are not governed by what makes your friends happy," she snapped back. "We are governed by the rules. The fine is $50,000. Pay it, or we will take further action." The line went dead. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't a mistake. This was an attack. The next day, I decided to try a different approach. I sent a polite, carefully worded email to the entire HOA board, laying out the history of the flooding problem, the HOA's inaction, and the success of my solution. I attached photos of the flooded yards from previous years and photos of the dry yards after the dam was built. I requested a meeting to discuss the matter like rational adults. For 2 days, there was only silence. Then I received a reply from a board member named David. His email was short and cautious. He said he understood my position, but that Marlene was adamant. He suggested that if I formally apologized and submitted a plan for the dam's removal, the board might be willing to negotiate the fine down. It was a small flicker of hope, but it felt hollow. Why should I apologize for fixing a problem? Why should I remove something that was protecting my property? Still, it was the only positive signal I'd received. I started gathering my documents. The old HOA letters admitting the flooding was a problem. The photos, my receipts for the materials I used to build the dam. I even printed out my email exchange with David. I put everything into a neat folder, just like I would for a complex wiring job. I've always believed that the truth is in the details. As I sat at my desk organizing the paperwork, I looked again at the copies of the permits the HOA had sent. Something about the county seal looked off, on a hunch. I pulled up the official county website and compared it to the one on the document. It wasn't even close. The one on Marlene's letter was distorted, slightly skewed, like a bad copy of a copy. They hadn't just made up the rules. They had forged official documents to back them up. That's when my disbelief turned into cold, hard anger. This wasn't about a dam anymore. This was about a bully who thought she could use lies and intimidation to steal $50,000 from me. Marlene Graves had made a very big mistake. She didn't know who she was messing with. Discovering that forged county seal was like flipping a switch in my head. The fear and confusion I'd been feeling since I got that letter evaporated, and something cold and clear took its place. Determination. Marlene Graves wasn't just a petty tyrant on a power trip. She was committing fraud. She was using fake government documents to try and extort $50,000 from me. This was no longer a simple dispute over a dam. This was a crime. And if there's one thing an electrician learns over 40 years, it's how to follow a circuit to find the fault. I spent the next week turning my quiet life into an investigation. I went through years of digital photos on my computer, finding every single picture I had of my backyard. I sorted them by date, creating a clear timeline. Here's the backyard in April 2021, a muddy mess after a 2-inch rain. Here it is again in July. Same story. I found a video my wife took of our grandkids trying to play in the yard, their boots sinking into the soggy lawn. The evidence was overwhelming. I printed them all out, marking each one with the date and a short description. Then I focused on the time after the dam was built. I set up a small weatherproof security camera on a pole overlooking the creek, the kind people use to watch for wildlife. It recorded 24/7. Sure enough, a week later, we got a proper thunderstorm. I sat in my kitchen watching the live feed on my tablet as the creek swelled. The water rose against the dam, the pressure building, but the structure held perfectly. The excess flow went exactly where it was supposed to, down the runoff channel and away from our homes. The camera captured everything. I saved the footage, a clear time-stamped video proving the dam worked and was causing zero harm. My folder of evidence was growing thicker by the day, with my new evidence in hand, including a high-resolution printout of the real county seal next to Marlene's forgery. I decided to reach out to David again, the one board member who had shown a flicker of reason. I sent him another email, this time more direct. I attached the side-by-side comparison of the seals and a short 2-minute clip from the security camera footage. I kept the message professional. I wrote, "David, as you can see, the document provided by the HOA appears to be fraudulent. The dam is working as intended and is preventing the very damage the HOA was notified about for years. I am asking the board to reconsider this fine." He called me less than an hour later. His voice was low and shaky, like he was worried someone might be listening. "Jack, I saw your email," he said, rushing his words. "Look, you're not wrong, but you need to be careful. You're making waves. Marlene, she doesn't back down. She sees this as a direct challenge to her authority." I asked him if the board was just going to let her commit fraud. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The board mostly does what Marlene wants." He finally admitted, "My advice to you, just take the dam down. It's not worth the fight she's going to bring to your door." He hung up before I could say another word. It was a brief win, a confirmation from the inside that I was right. But it came with a chilling warning. The system wasn't just broken, it was captured. 3 days later, Marlene brought the fight to my door. I was in my garage sharpening my lawnmower blade when a police car pulled into my driveway. A uniformed deputy got out and walked up to my front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never had the police at my house for anything. I walked out to meet him, wiping my greasy hands on a rag. He was a younger guy, looked professional, but his eyes were flat, like he'd already made up his mind about the situation. "Are you Jack Miller?" he asked. I said I was. "I'm Deputy Harris," he said, not offering a handshake. "I'm here on behalf of the Homeowners Association. We've received a formal complaint regarding an unpermitted structure on your property that is illegally altering a waterway." He handed me a folded set of papers. It was a cease and desist order full of dense legal language, but the message was simple. I had 48 hours to begin the immediate removal of the dam, or the HOA would pursue criminal charges for non-compliance. My calm facade finally cracked. My voice was tighter than I wanted it to be. "Deputy, this is a civil matter. The HOA is using forged documents," I started, but he cut me off. "Sir, I'm not here to debate it. I'm here to serve you this notice. The complaint has been filed. If the structure is not removed, they can file for an injunction, and you could be held in contempt of court." He pointed toward the creek. "That thing comes down, or we'll be back, and you won't like the next visit." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. I stood there in my driveway, the legal papers shaking in my hand, my whole world tilting on its axis. My home, my property, the place I felt safest in the world, was no longer my own. My rights meant nothing. All it took was a vindictive woman with a good story and a badge to back her up. The $50,000 fine suddenly felt very real, a financial blow that could wipe out a huge chunk of my retirement savings. This calm, peaceful life I had built was being shattered by a petty neighborhood tyrant. My anger was now mixed with a heavy dose of fear. I was just one man. How could I possibly fight back against an organization that could manipulate the law and turn the police against me? Was justice even possible when the whole system felt rigged? From the start, for 2 days after the deputy's visit, I just felt numb. The cease and desist order sat on my kitchen table, a constant reminder of how powerless I was. That piece of paper gave me 48 hours to start destroying my own work. It felt like I was being backed into a corner with no way out. Marlene had the law, or at least a man with a badge, on her side. I had a folder full of photos and a strong belief I was right. But what good was that against a legal threat? I spent one of those nights sitting in the dark, just thinking I could give in, tear the dam down, and maybe try to negotiate the fine. But the thought of rewarding Marlene's fraud and bullying made my stomach turn. Giving in would mean she won. It would mean that any time she wanted something, all she had to do was print a fake document and call the cops. No, I couldn't do that. I needed to fight. But I realized I couldn't do it alone. I'm good with wires and circuits. But this problem was about engineering and legal threats. I needed an expert. I needed my friend Maya. Maya Torres and I go way back. We worked at the same power plant for nearly 20 years before we both retired. While I was wrangling high-voltage lines, she was a civil engineer, the one they called when they needed to design a new foundation or solve a complex drainage problem. She's one of the smartest, most no-nonsense people I've ever met. If something doesn't make sense, she'll pick it apart until it does. I called her the next morning. When she arrived, I had everything laid out on my dining room table. The $50. Zero. Fine. The forged permit. The threatening letters. The cease and desist order. And my folder of evidence. She didn't say a word for nearly half an hour. She just put on her reading glasses and went through every single piece of paper. Her brow furrowed in concentration. When she got to the side-by-side comparison of the county seals, she let out a short, sharp laugh. "Jack, this is impressively sloppy," she said, tapping the forged document. "Look at the font here and here. They're different sizes. And this regulation code, it doesn't exist." I looked it up on my phone on the drive over. This is garbage. Hearing her say it, an actual engineer, was a huge relief. She walked out to the backyard with me and spent another 20 minutes inspecting the dam. She measured the thickness of the concrete, checked the seals around the rocks, and studied the flow of the water. Finally, she turned to me and nodded. "This isn't just a pile of rocks, Jack. This is a properly constructed gravity weir. It does exactly what it's supposed to do." For the audience at home who isn't an engineer, the way the dam works is simple. Think of it like a big, solid speed bump for the creek. During normal weather, the water flows right over the top without any problem. But when a big storm hits and the water comes rushing down, the dam slows it down. The water backs up a little bit in a designated safe area behind the dam, kind of like filling a small tub. This gives the main creek downstream time to handle all the runoff from the rest of the neighborhood. The dam has a channel built into the side, an overflow valve that directs any excess water safely into a natural drainage ditch that runs through the woods. It's a simple, effective design. Maya explained that we needed more than just photos. We needed hard data. So, that's what we did. We spent the next 2 days turning my backyard into a science project. We installed a water level gauge behind the dam. We used my security camera footage and a little bit of math to create a water flow log. We recorded the creek's level every hour on the hour. We documented everything, building a professional case file. Maya even typed up a formal 2-page report on her findings, complete with diagrams and her official stamp as a licensed engineer. She concluded the dam was not only safe, but was actively preventing property damage and posed zero risk to the community. This was our first big "how I proved it" moment. We weren't just saying the dam was safe. We were showing it with numbers and an expert's validation. With Maya's report and our new data logs, I felt a surge of confidence. We put together a formal demand letter. It wasn't fancy, just a clear, polite, and firm letter addressed to the entire HOA board. In it, we laid out the facts. We included a copy of Maya's engineering report, our water flow logs, the side-by-side photo proving the forgery, and a demand that they immediately rescind the $50, zero, fine, and the cease and desist order. We also demanded a formal apology. We sent it via certified mail, so we would have a receipt proving they got it. Then we waited. I felt like we had them cornered. How could they argue with an expert report and undeniable proof of fraud? The answer came a week later in another white envelope. I expected a negotiation, maybe even a retreat. What I got was an escalation. Marlene had doubled down. Inside the envelope was a brand new fine notice. This one was for $10,000 for a community safety violation. The reason? I had installed an unauthorized surveillance device, my little security camera, which they claimed was violating the privacy of my neighbors. Attached was another crudely forged document, this time citing a non-existent bylaw about cameras. They completely ignored our evidence. They ignored the engineer's report. They just attacked me from a new direction. But something had shifted in the neighborhood. My neighbors, George and Clara, had seen the police car in my driveway. They'd heard about the cease and desist order. When I showed George the new fine for the camera, he just shook his head. "That's it. I've had enough of her," he said. That evening, he walked around and talked to the other two homeowners who had been dealing with the flooding. He told them what was happening, how I was being punished for solving the problem Marlene and the board refused to fix. The next day, he came to my door with a signed letter. It was a statement of support signed by every household on our side of the cul-de-sac, confirming that the dam had solved the flooding problem and that my security camera was only pointed at my own property and the creek. It wasn't just my fight anymore. The evidence was building, and now the community was starting to rally. I felt empowered, like the tide was finally starting to turn. Marlene thought she could isolate and bully me into submission. But all she had done was wake up a sleeping giant. We had the facts, we had the expert, and now we had the neighbors. Her little kingdom of lies was starting to show cracks in the foundation. Marlene Graves did not like being ignored. Our demand letter, backed by Maya's expert report and the support of my neighbors, was a direct challenge to her power, and she reacted like a cornered animal. Instead of backing down, she escalated. The fine for the unauthorized surveillance device was just the beginning. A week after I received it, 2 brand-new high-definition security cameras appeared on the lamppost across the street, both aimed directly at my house. It was a brazen, in-your-face move. One camera was focused on my front door and driveway, and the other was zoomed in as far as it could go on my backyard. Pointed right at the dam, it was a clear act of intimidation. She was letting me know she was watching my every move. It was creepy, and it was meant to be. I called Maya, my frustration boiling over. "She's trying to provoke you, Jack," Maya said, her voice calm and steady as always. "Don't take the bait. Let her think she's winning. Just keep documenting everything." She was right. Marlene wasn't just a bully. She was a predictable one, and her predictability was about to become her downfall. I adjusted my own security camera slightly, the one she'd fined me for. Now, in addition to watching the water levels at the dam, it had a perfect clear view of the lamppost across the street where her new cameras were mounted. I just sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. About a week later, I saw an unmarked white van pull up to the lamppost. A man in a plain work uniform got out, climbed a ladder, and started fiddling with one of the cameras. A few minutes later, Marlene's car pulled up. She got out and spoke to the man, pointing up at the camera and then gesturing toward my house. She handed him a piece of paper, and he went back up the ladder. The whole exchange was captured perfectly by my camera. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Their body language said it all. This wasn't official HOA business. This was personal. But the real gift came 2 days later. An email landed in my inbox from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation, this time for having unsecured construction materials in my yard. The violation included a photo. A blurry, pixelated shot of my wheelbarrow and 2 bags of concrete mix sitting neatly next to my shed. The photo was timestamped that morning. There was just one problem. The wheelbarrow and concrete had been put away inside my shed the night before. The picture was impossible. I checked the footage from my camera, and there it was at 6:15 a.m., long before the sun was fully up. Marlene's car had rolled slowly past my house. The car stopped for a moment, and I could just make out her silhouette in the driver's seat. It was a clear, calculated lie, and I had her dead to rights. But Marlene's real masterpiece of deception came a few days after that. I was out back checking on my vegetable garden when Tom Reynolds, another board member who acted as Marlene's loyal enforcer, came marching across my lawn. Tom was a big guy, a former security guard who clearly enjoyed flexing his authority. "Jack!" he boomed, not even bothering with a hello. "Marlene sent me. We need to inspect this dam again. There are reports of it leaking." I knew it was a lie, but I played along. "Sure, Tom, take a look." As he stomped around the dam, poking at it with his shoe, I noticed he was holding a clipboard. He made a few notes, then turned to leave. That evening, I got another email from the HOA. Attached was a new violation notice, this time with a $5,000 fine for structural instability. The notice included what was supposed to be Tom's signed inspection report. But I had my own report of that little visit. I had walked out with my phone in my pocket, recording audio of the entire conversation. I also had the clear video from my camera showing Tom spending less than 30 seconds at the dam before leaving. There was no inspection. It was just a performance. This was our biggest "how I proved it" moment yet. We now had her on video, staging a fake violation. And based on the signature, likely forging Tom's report to justify a new fine, we had her cold. The constant harassment was starting to wear on my neighbors too. Marlene had started sending violation notices to anyone who had signed my letter of support. George got a warning for his grass being half an inch too tall. Clara got a notice because her mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black. It was petty, vindictive, and designed to scare them into silence. And it was working. People were afraid. They'd give me a sympathetic nod when they saw me, but nobody wanted to speak out anymore. They were worried about being Marlene's next target. Seeing their fear made me realize I had to do more than just fight for myself. I had to give them the tools to fight back, too. I spent an afternoon writing up a simple one-page guide. I called it the HOA Harassment Log. It was a step-by-step guide on how to document everything. I made it as simple as possible. Step 1. Save every email. Create a special folder for them. Step 2. Take pictures. If you get a violation notice, take a picture of what they're complaining about with a timestamp. Step 3. Keep a written log. Write down every interaction, every phone call with the date, time, and what was said. I printed out 20 copies, and after dark, I walked around the neighborhood and quietly slipped one into each of my supportive neighbors' mailboxes. I didn't know if anyone would use it, but I had to try. I was building an army, one piece of paper at a time. The frustration with Marlene's bullying was immense, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope that our combined evidence could bring her down. The unity was fragile, but it was there. The next day, as if on cue, things got even worse. I was in my kitchen making lunch when I saw the flashing blue and red lights again. It was Deputy Harris pulling into my driveway. This time, Marlene was with him. Standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her face, Harris walked up to my door, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice hard, "I'm here with Marlene Graves, the president of the HOA. She is filing a criminal complaint against you for trespassing." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Trespassing? Deputy, this is my property." He didn't blink. "She has an official HOA document authorizing an inspection of the common drainage area on your property line. You have refused access. You are trespassing on community property." He held up a piece of paper. I could see from my doorway it was another one of Marlene's forgeries. With my property line conveniently redrawn to put the dam on HOA land, it was the most audacious lie yet. A desperate last-ditch attempt to use the law as a weapon. And as I stood there with a police officer on my porch, threatening to arrest me for standing in my own home, I knew Marlene had finally overplayed her hand. She thought this was checkmate. But all she had really done was give me the final piece of evidence I needed to end her reign of terror for good. Marlene's trespassing complaint was a masterstroke of malice. She didn't just file a police report. She used it to get an emergency court injunction. Because I had criminally refused her access to what she claimed was HOA common land, a judge, without hearing my side of the story, signed an order. The order was delivered by a courier 2 days later. It was stark and brutal. It stated that I had 72 hours to completely remove the dam. Not just start the removal, but have it gone. If I failed to comply, I would be found in contempt of court and could be arrested and jailed. There was no more room for negotiation. There was no appeal. This was a legal sledgehammer, and it hit me right between the eyes. All the evidence I had collected, the videos, the forged documents, Maya's expert report, it all felt useless. The system I thought would protect me had been turned into a weapon and aimed right at me. That piece of paper from the court was the heaviest thing I'd ever held. The original $50,000 fine now seemed almost trivial. This was about my freedom. I was a 63-year-old retired electrician, a man who had never even had a speeding ticket, and I was facing the threat of being put in jail. The very next day, the HOA newsletter came out. It was a special edition slipped under every door in the neighborhood. On the front page was a grainy photo of me standing on my porch, talking to Deputy Harris. The headline read, "HOA takes action to protect community waterways. Cites resident for criminal trespass." The article, written by Marlene, painted me as a rogue homeowner who was endangering the entire neighborhood with a dangerous illegal structure. It was a complete work of fiction, a public shaming designed to destroy my reputation and justify her actions. She made it sound like I was a villain, a menace who had been stopped just in the nick of time by her heroic leadership. People started to look at me differently. Neighbors who had been friendly a month ago now averted their eyes when I got the mail. The whispers started. I heard them through my open window one afternoon. "Did you hear about Jack? I guess that dam really was illegal," another said. "I don't know. Marlene can be tough, but she wouldn't just make this stuff up, would she?" My small base of support was crumbling under the weight of her official-looking lies. The harassment logs I had passed out felt like a foolish gesture. No one wanted to get caught in the crossfire now that the police and the courts were involved. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my wife, Sarah. She had been my rock through all of this. But for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Jack," she said, her voice quiet, "maybe it's time to just give up. Pay the fine, tear down the dam. It's not worth going to jail for." The thought was sickening, but I couldn't ignore it. The fight was costing us everything. The legal threats were terrifying. My good name in the neighborhood I had called home for 3 decades was being dragged through the mud. My savings, the money we had worked our whole lives for, was under threat. I was tired. I felt defeated. I had spent weeks fighting for what was right, only to be crushed by the system. Giving in felt like a betrayal of everything I believed in. But what was the alternative? Sitting in a jail cell while Marlene celebrated her victory, I was at my lowest point. I truly considered just surrendering. The next morning, I made my decision. I would comply with the court order. I couldn't risk going to jail. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but my family came first. I called a local contractor who had a small excavator and hired him to come out the next day. The day he arrived was gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. With a few powerful movements of the machine's arm, the dam I had spent 2 months carefully building was reduced to a pile of rubble. It was heartbreaking to watch, as the contractor loaded the broken concrete and rocks into a dump truck. I took a picture of the destroyed dam with my phone. This was another piece of evidence, proof that I had complied with the unjust order. I sent the photo to the HOA with a simple one-sentence email. The structure has been removed per the court order. Marlene didn't reply. She didn't need to. She had won. But then something unexpected happened. As if on cue, the sky opened up. It started raining. Not just a light spring shower, but a heavy, relentless downpour. It rained all afternoon and all through the night. The kind of storm that would have tested the dam to its limits. But the dam was gone. The next morning, I woke up to frantic phone calls. It was George, my next-door neighbor. "Jack, you have to see this," he said, his voice panicked. I walked to my back window and looked out. The creek had become a raging brown river. The water was higher than I had ever seen it. It had completely submerged the lower half of my yard. And George's yard was even worse. A wave of muddy water was creeping up his lawn, already lapping at the wheels of his brand-new riding mower. Clara's yard on the other side was a lake. The water was only a few feet from her back patio. By removing the one thing that was controlling the water, Marlene had gotten exactly what she wanted. And in doing so, she had unleashed the very disaster the dam was built to prevent. The neighborhood was literally sinking under the weight of her victory. And as I stood there watching the floodwaters rise, a new plan began to form in my mind. The fight wasn't over, in fact, it was just getting started. I just had to prove how Marlene's abuse of power had led to this very moment. I grabbed my camera. It was time to get to work. The flood was a disaster, but it was also an opportunity. As I watched the muddy waters swallow my neighbors' yards, I knew this was the turning point. Marlene's victory had a very visible, very expensive price tag, and everyone could see it. For 2 days, I did nothing but document the damage. I used my camera, the one Marlene had tried to find me for, to record time-lapse videos of the water rising and then slowly, painfully receding. I took hundreds of high-resolution photos of the damage to my property. George's and Clara's. George's new mower was a total loss. The engine flooded with silty water. Clara's patio furniture was floating in her backyard, and a thick layer of stinking mud covered everything. The whispers in the neighborhood changed overnight. The hushed accusations against me turned into angry murmurs against the HOA. People were no longer wondering if I was a troublemaker. They were asking why the HOA had forced me to remove the one thing that had kept them all safe. The fear of Marlene's retribution was being replaced by anger at her incompetence. This was my moment. The private battle had to become a public one. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the local news. I looked up the number for the station's investigative team, the ones who did the stories on consumer rights and government corruption. I left a message, keeping it short and to the point. My name is Jack Miller. My HOA used forged documents to fine me $50,000 and force me to remove a flood control dam. Now our neighborhood is underwater. I have all the proof. I didn't know if they would call back, but it was a shot I had to take. To my surprise, a reporter named Sarah Jenkins called me back within the hour. She sounded intrigued but skeptical. "Mr. Miller," she said, "that's a pretty serious accusation. You said you have proof." "I have everything," I told her. Every email, every fake document, videos, an engineer's report, and a backyard full of floodwater to prove my point. We scheduled a meeting for the next day. I spent that evening with Maya, organizing my folder of evidence into a clear, chronological story. We laid it all out on my dining room table, just as we had done before. But this time, it wasn't for a letter, it was for the whole city to see. When Sarah Jenkins and her cameraman arrived, I was ready. I didn't rant or rave. I just walked her through the facts. Calm and steady, I started with the initial fine. I showed her the blurry forged county permit, and then laid the crystal-clear official one from the county website right next to it. I played the video from my security camera, showing the dam working perfectly during the last storm. Then I showed her the escalating fines, the fake violation notices for the camera and the wheelbarrow, complete with the video evidence proving Marlene had staged the whole thing. I played the audio recording of my brief inspection with Tom Reynolds. The final piece was the trespassing complaint. I showed her the fake property map Marlene had given the deputy, and then the official plat map from my deed, proving the dam was entirely on my land. This was the how I proved it moment that hit the hardest. We had methodically disproven every single claim, every fine, and every threat with simple, undeniable facts. The reporter was scribbling notes furiously, her initial skepticism turning into wide-eyed disbelief. "She forged all of this?" Sarah asked, pointing at the stack of fake notices. "And the police acted on it?" "They did," I said. "They never asked for my side of the story. They just took her word for it." Then I took her and the cameraman to the backyard. The water had receded some, but the devastation was clear. The mud was everywhere. George and Clara came out and agreed to speak on camera, their voices shaking with anger as they described the damage to their property and how they had pleaded with the HOA for years to do something about the flooding. The camera captured the destroyed lawnmower, the ruined gardens, the thick line of mud on the side of their houses. The visual evidence was powerful. The story wasn't just about my fight anymore. It was about a whole neighborhood failed by the very organization meant to protect it. At the end of the interview, Sarah asked me what I wanted to happen. I looked straight into the camera. "I want the fines dropped. I want my neighbors to be compensated for their damages, and I want the people who did this to be held accountable," I said. An HOA president shouldn't have the power to destroy people's lives with lies and fake documents. The story aired 2 days later on the 6 Toulouse News. It was devastating. Sarah Jenkins had done an incredible job laying out the evidence piece by piece. They showed the forged documents on screen, zooming in on the fake seals. They played a clip of my security camera footage, followed by shots of the flooded yards. They even had a short, flustered interview with Marlene, whom they had caught coming out of a grocery store. She looked stunned, denying everything and blaming me for everything. But she came across as defensive and untrustworthy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the next morning, my phone was ringing off the hook with calls from other people in the city who had similar stories of HOA abuse. The news station's Facebook page was flooded with comments supporting me. My quiet, private battle had exploded into a major local scandal. The other HOA board members who had blindly followed Marlene were now in full panic mode. David, the one who had warned me, called me that afternoon. "Jack, we had no idea," he stammered. "We just saw the paper she showed us. We're calling an emergency meeting." Justice, which had seemed so impossible just a week before, now felt not only possible but inevitable. Marlene's campaign of lies and intimidation had been exposed to the bright, unforgiving light of day. She had threatened to sue me, but it was an empty threat now. All her allies were running for cover, and her power base had crumbled to dust. The tide had well and truly turned. The news story was a bomb, and the fallout was immediate. The emergency HOA board meeting was held 2 nights later in the community clubhouse, and it wasn't the usual sleepy affair with a half-dozen attendees. The room was packed. People I hadn't spoken to in years were there, standing along the walls because all the chairs were taken. They weren't just from my cul-de-sac. They were from all over the neighborhood. Many of them were clutching copies of the old newsletters where Marlene had publicly shamed me. My evidence folder, which Sarah Jenkins had so clearly presented on TV, had opened a floodgate of a different kind. For the first time, people weren't afraid to be angry. The board sat at a long table at the front, looking pale and nervous. all except Marlene. She sat right in the middle, her back ramrod straight, a defiant scowl plastered on her face, as if she were the one who had been wronged. When the meeting was called to order, she tried to start with old business, as if nothing had happened. She didn't get 2 words out before George stood up from the front row. "We're not talking about landscaping," he said, his voice loud and clear in the silent room. "We're talking about fraud. We're talking about the 1/2 foot of mud in my brand-new shed." A woman from the next street over stood up. "And what about the $500 fine I got for a dead patch of grass during a drought? Was that based on a real rule, or did you just make that up, too?" One by one, people started to speak, their voices overlapping, a rising tide of frustration and anger that had been held back for years. They brought up petty fines, abusive inspections, and threats. Marlene tried to bang her gavel, demanding order, but no one was listening to her anymore. The power she had held over them for so long had vanished. Finally, David, the only board member who had shown any decency, turned to her. "Marlene, you have to address this," he said, his voice pleading. "Show them the documents. Show them they're real." She just glared at him, then at the crowd. "This meeting is out of order," she snapped. "This is a witch hunt started by a man who broke the rules and put this entire community at risk." That's when I stood up. I didn't raise my voice, I just held up my phone. "Marlene, is this your signature on the trespassing complaint you gave to the police?" I asked, showing a close-up photo of the document. "And is this your car on my security footage from the morning I received a fake violation?" I swiped to the next photo. The room fell silent again, every eye glued to the evidence in my hand. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked down the table at her fellow board members, searching for an ally, but they all avoided her gaze. Tom Reynolds, her enforcer, was staring intently at the floor. In that moment, she was utterly alone. Her face, which had been a mask of defiant rage, suddenly crumpled. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, stood up, and without another word, walked out of the room a few minutes later. David announced that Marlene Graves had submitted her immediate resignation as president of the board. A wave of applause and relieved cheers swept through the room. The rest of the meeting was a blur of motions and votes. The remaining board members, desperate to save themselves, agreed to everything first. They voted unanimously to rescind all fines against me, totaling over $60,000. Second, they issued a formal public apology to me and my family, to be posted on the community website and in the next newsletter. Third, they agreed to hire an independent claims adjuster to assess the flood damage to my property and my neighbors, and to pay for all repairs and replacements out of the HOA's reserve funds. It was a total and complete surrender, but it wasn't enough in the following weeks. With Maya and George leading the charge, we formed a new community oversight committee. We didn't just just want to get rid of a bad president. We wanted to change the system that allowed her to abuse her power. We drafted a new set of bylaws. Fines were now capped at a reasonable amount. All violation notices required clear time-stamped photographic evidence. The HOA was explicitly banned from placing surveillance cameras on common property aimed at private residences. And most importantly, all board meetings and financial records were now open to every single homeowner. We built transparency into the very structure of the HOA. About a month later, with a proper stamped and fully legal permit from the county in hand, we rebuilt the dam. I used the same basic design, but this time Maya made a few engineering improvements. It wasn't just my project anymore. George came over to help me mix the concrete. Clara brought us sandwiches and coffee. Other neighbors, people who had been afraid to even look at me a few months ago, stopped by to offer a hand or just to say thank you. The dam became a symbol not of defiance, but of our reclaimed community. The peace that settled over the neighborhood afterward was more than just the absence of Marlene's angry letters. It was a genuine sense of safety and relief. The following spring, the heavy rains came again, right on schedule. I stood at my kitchen window one morning, watching the creek swell. The water rose against the new dam, slowed, and flowed away harmlessly, just as it was supposed to. The yard stayed dry, the homes were safe. Maya came over with a couple of beers to watch. We stood on the back porch for a while, just looking at the water. She really thought she could bully a creek into submission, Maya said with a small smile. I thought about all the fake documents, the lies, and the pointless, destructive fight. I thought about the simple, undeniable force of the water in front of us. You can't vote against gravity, I said. And in the end, the truth proved to be just as unstoppable. Have you faced an HOA nightmare like this? Share your story in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. Your experience could inspire others to stand up to petty tyrants. Subscribe to HOA Tragedies for more stories of ordinary people taking on corrupt HOAs. Your support helps us expose these injustices. Thanks for watching HOA Tragedies. If this story made you cheer or shake your head, hit that like button and share your thoughts below. We post new HOA battles every week, so subscribe to catch the next one.